look at this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know, something we all share.
Yeah. And, I think what makes Miller's perspective so unique is that he's been both a doctor and a patient
Yeah.
facing his own mortality.
Yeah.
So it brings a really interesting lens to his observations, I think.
Totally. And I think to really unpack that, we should start with the event that, kind of shifted his perspective in this really profound way. So picture this. He's a college sophomore, just coming back from Thanksgiving break with some friends.
Okay.
And they make this spontaneous decision to climb on top of a parked commuter train.
Oh, wow.
And what happens next is utterly transformative.
Okay.
So tragically, he comes into contact with live overhead electrical wires.
Oh, my goodness.
And an incredible 11,000 volts surge through his body.
Wow.
It's kind of a surreal detail, but amidst all of this trauma,
Okay.
his watch continues to function,
Oh, wow.
and his father now wears it.
Wow,
It's such a poignant detail to me.
it really is, yeah, a potent symbol.
Yeah, and this night, he describes it as the beginning of his, formal relationship with death,
Right.
his own potential death.
Yeah.
And the start of a really long journey as a patient, which he beautifully defines as just one who suffers.
Right.
So potent.
Yeah.
And, that firsthand experience as a patient,
Yeah.
navigating the healthcare system from that position,
Right.
gave him such a critical lens through which to view it.
For sure.
And, he's very clear to acknowledge the brilliance within American healthcare and the sincere desire to help that motivates most professionals.
Totally. The vast majority of people who enter healthcare
Yeah.
are driven by this genuine desire to alleviate suffering, to really help people,
Right.
to make a difference.
To make things better.
Yeah.
Yet he doesn't shy away from questioning, the fundamental design of the system, arguing that it's primarily structured around diseases rather than the people who are experiencing them.
Yeah, I see that.
And he contends that this bias, this inherent sort of bias towards the disease and not the human,
Right.
has really heartbreaking consequences
Yeah.
as people approach the end of life.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What's so fascinating to me, though,
Yeah.
is that while he so powerfully illustrates the pain that this focus can create, he also views this very point as a profound opportunity for, meaningful redesign.
Totally.
A chance to make a difference when it matters most deeply.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So with that, fundamental critique in mind,
Okay.
let's delve into a really crucial distinction he makes, which is the difference between what he terms necessary and unnecessary suffering.
Yeah,
This is central to his philosophy.
definitely. And he characterizes necessary suffering as being really intrinsic to the human condition,
Right.
almost like part of the deal. You
Yeah,
know?
right.
It's the kind of suffering that actually helps us to grow, to learn to adapt,
Totally.
and ultimately, I think, to evolve as human beings.
He makes this really interesting point about this type of suffering, which is that it can serve to bridge the gap
Right.
between caregiver and receiver.
Yeah.
And that shared experience, that sense of suffering together,
Yeah.
can cultivate such a deep sense of compassion
Absolutely.
and ultimately contribute to healing in a broader sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And his own experience of losing his limbs
Right.
serves as this really powerful example of this.
Yeah.
This loss became an undeniable reality, something that he just had to integrate into his being.
Right.
And through that acceptance, he found a way forward.
Totally.
Now, on the other hand,
Okay.
he talks about unnecessary suffering, the kind that's, in his words, invented,
Okay.
doesn't serve any real meaningful purpose.
Right.
But the really encouraging thing here is that because it's a construct, it has the potential to be dismantled and changed.
Out of that.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's really underscoring that the experience of dying is not entirely predetermined.
Yeah.
We have agency in shaping it.
Right.
And this leads us to his first key design cue,
Okay.
which is that, our primary responsibility as caregivers should be to alleviate suffering,
Yeah.
not to inadvertently add to it.
Of course.
And this is a core principle underpinning palliative care.
Right.
And he offers a really important clarification about palliative care,
Okay.
because I think there are still a lot of misunderstandings around what it actually entails.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not just about end-of-life care or hospice. Instead, it's about providing comfort
Yeah.
and enhancing well-being at any stage of a serious illness.
That's an important point.
Right. You don't have to be like right at the end to benefit from palliative care.
No, you don't. And I think its focus on quality of life is so important.
Yeah, totally. And to bring this to life, he introduces us to Frank, a patient that he's known for a number of years,
Right.
who is living with advanced prostate cancer
Wow.
and HIV.
Oh, wow.
And their conversations go far beyond just managing physical symptoms.
Right.
Like, what's really illuminating to me is how they engage in these open and honest reflections about life itself.
Yeah.
Like, Frank uses these conversations as a way to process ongoing grief.
Right.
And to mentally prepare for whatever comes next.
Yeah.
Like, allowing him to kind of move forward without, accumulating all this unresolved stuff.
That makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And Frank, with his, like, adventurous spirit,
Okay.
he made the decision to raft down the Colorado River.
Wow.
Despite the inherent risks given his health conditions.
Right.
It's such an inspiring example
It is.
of prioritizing living fully and engaging with life while he still can.
Yeah, and Miller really emphasizes that while Frank's choice might seem, extraordinary, it reflects this very basic human desire
Right.
to have the autonomy and the support to determine what is the best quality of life
Yeah.
for ourselves
Right.
based on our individual values and priorities,
Yeah.
even as our circumstances change and evolve.
Totally. And this all connects to what he describes as a significant shift in perspective.
Okay.
So after his accident, he actually changed his academic focus
Oh,
to art history
interesting.
because he felt this really deep need to learn how to see the world in a new way, especially given how drastically his own physical reality had been altered.
Makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Cultivating the ability to perceive the world differently, to find new meaning and beauty
Right.
became such a powerful tool for him.
Totally.
A kind of personal transformation that helped him reframe his experience of suffering.
I like that.
And he then takes us to the Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco, where they have this really moving ritual surrounding death that beautifully illustrates this shift in perspective.
Okay.
So when a resident passes away
Yeah.
and they're being moved to the hearse, they pause in the garden,
Wow.
and anyone who wants to, residents, family members, staff, even the hearse drivers,
Wow.
are invited to share a story, a song,
Beautiful.
a moment of quiet reflection
Yeah.
as they sprinkle the body with flower petals.
Wow. That's really powerful.
It's such a stark contrast to the often sterile and hurried atmosphere
Yeah.
of, a typical hospital setting,
Right.
where the focus is so much on protocols and efficiency, sometimes at the expense of acknowledging the individual who has died
Right.
and the grief of those left behind.
Yeah, I can see that.
He's careful not to dismiss the role of hospitals, acknowledging their vital function in treating acute trauma and curable illnesses. But he points out that they were designed for those purposes. It's not necessarily as spaces where people can live and die with dignity and peace.
Yeah.
And he shares this really touching anecdote from his time in the burn unit. He was unable to see the snow falling outside,
Okay.
but one of his nurses went to this incredible effort
Wow.
to smuggle in a snowball for him.
Oh, wow.
That sensation of the cold snow
Right.
against his burned skin?
Wow.
The wonder of it melting?
Yeah.
He describes it as this moment of such profound connection. It brought him to the realization that simply being a part of this planet,
Yes.
of the universe, held immense value.
Absolutely.
And he links this to a really important observation,
Okay.
which is that some individuals are actually ready to die. Not because they've found peace, but because their lives have become, in his words, cut off or ugly.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And this leads us to this demographic reality
Right
of
there.
what's been called the silver tsunami. This steadily increasing number of people
Right.
living with chronic and terminal illnesses
Yeah.
well into older age. And he stresses that as a society,
Right.
we're not adequately prepared
Right.
to meet the complex needs of this growing population.
Yeah, that's a big problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And he really emphasizes the need for this responsive and adaptable infrastructure
Right.
to address these needs.
Yeah.
And outlines these really critical components for building it. Thoughtful policy, comprehensive education and training for caregivers,
Yeah.
robust systems of support,
Right.
and even the design of physical spaces,
Oh, wow.
like the bricks and mortar of care facilities.
That's really interesting.
Right, and he reminds us that we have this significant body of research
Okay.
that provides these valuable insights into
Right.
what truly matters to people as they approach the end of their lives. So things like ensuring comfort, feeling a sense of being unburdened,
Yeah.
and not being a burden to loved ones,
Right.
achieving a sense of existential peace, experiencing moments of wonderment and
Yeah.
connection to something larger than themselves.
Absolutely.
These consistently emerge as like key priorities.
Oh, so true.
And drawing from their experience at Zen Hospice,
Okay.
he shares some really subtle but profoundly important lessons.
Yeah.
And one of the core insights, I think, is the understanding that little things aren't so little.
That's a good one.
Right.
Yeah.
So he illustrates this with the story of Jeanette, who was living with ALS. And as her breathing became more and more labored, she expressed this desire to start smoking French cigarettes again.
Really?
Not out of, a desire for self-destruction,
Right.
but as a way to feel her lungs fully engaged while she still had the capacity.
Wow.
It's a powerful reminder that, priorities can shift in unexpected ways.
They really can.
Right. And then there's the story of Kate,
Okay.
who simply wanted her dog, Austin, by her bedside
Wow.
instead of pursuing further rounds of chemo.
Wow.
It speaks volumes about the importance of sensory comfort,
Right.
emotional connection,
Yeah.
and the value of just being present with what brings us joy and solace.
Absolutely.
These stories really underscore how much the experience of, nearing the end of life
Yeah.
comes down to our senses
Right.
and our physical bodies, the very vessels through which we experience both living and dying.
Right.
He mentions the kitchen at Zen Hospice
Okay.
as a really meaningful space, even for residents who have limited ability to eat.
Yeah.
What makes it so significant
Yeah.
is the nourishment it provides on multiple levels.
Right.
The aromas, the symbolic act of preparing food, the sense of community it fosters. Even for those who can't physically partake,
Right.
these sensory experiences can be so powerful. I love that.
And he even touches on, the implications for individuals living with dementia,
Okay.
highlighting how primal sensory delights
Great.
can bypass cognitive limitations
Yeah.
and connect people to the present moment in these really profound ways.
So true.
And this leads to his second key design cue,
Okay.
which is tending to dignity through the realm of the senses,
Yep.
the physical body
Yeah.
and aesthetics,
I like that.
right? Recognizing the impact of our physical and sensory experiences,
Yeah.
particularly when other aspects of life might be changing or fading.
Yeah, that's really good.
And this segues perfectly into his third and final design cue,
Okay.
which is about elevating our focus towards well-being, striving to make life more fulfilling and meaningful,
Right.
not just less terrible.
I love that.
He calls this principle beneficence.
Okay.
And this is where, the shift from a purely disease-centered model of care.
To one that prioritizes the individual
Yeah,
and their human experience
for sure.
really takes hold.
Yeah.
Caring becomes this creative endeavor focused on enhancing quality of life
Absolutely.
rather than just combating illness.
Right.
And he uses this maybe unexpected wordplay
Okay.
in this context, explaining that it's actually one of the most sophisticated forms of adaptation.
Wow.
And he gives these great examples like cuisine, architecture, fashion music,
Right.
all originating from, basic human needs, but elevated through creativity and playfulness.
I like that.
And applying this to the context of dying,
Okay.
he suggests creating both physical and emotional space to allow life to play itself all the way out,
Yeah.
as this final, maybe even beautiful crescendo.
That's nice.
It's not about avoiding sorrow,
Right.
which is an inevitable part of life, but it's about, intentionally designing towards death
Right.
in a way that honors the fullness of life until the very end.
Yeah, I agree.
He shares his own powerful experience of parts of him dying early on following the accident,
Right.
and how actively redesigning his life in response to that
Yeah.
has paradoxically been a source of liberation
Totally.
and a deeper meaning.
Yeah.
He emphasizes this transformative power of finding beauty and meaning in the life that remains,
Right.
even as other aspects are diminishing.
Yeah.
That image of the melting snowball, right,
Powerful.
became this potent symbol of finding value in fleeting moments.
Oh, true.
He concludes with this really powerful and thought-provoking idea
Okay.
that we can learn to live, well, not in spite of death,
Right.
but because of its inherent presence.
I love that.
And his final call to action is that we should allow death to be what takes us,
Yeah.
rather than a land of imagination in how we choose to live.
So powerful.
It's a really moving and ultimately, I think, a hopeful message.
It is.
So to recap those core insights
Okay.
from our deep dive into B.J. Miller's perspective,
Yeah.
we explored the distinction between necessary and unnecessary suffering, the importance of tending to dignity through our senses
Right.
and the aesthetic environment, and the need to shift our focus towards well-being
Yeah.
and a more imaginative, human-centered approach to the end of life.
I love that.
And for you, our listener, who loves gaining knowledge
Yes.
and understanding different perspectives on the significant aspects of the human experience,
Right.
these insights offer such a valuable framework
They do.
for considering this universal journey.
Absolutely.
So as you go about your day,
Okay.
maybe take a moment to consider how these ideas might encourage you to appreciate the sensory details of your own life more fully,
Right.
or to reflect on how we as a society often approach the topic of aging and dying.
That's a good point.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, this is a good one.